Cool. Hey, everybody. Excited to kick off our next portfolio thesis interview with our portfolio company, AOA. And I'm here with one of the founders, Oriana. I'm going to share a quick high-level overview on the core thesis of the investment, and then we're going to dive into getting to know Oriana better, her founders, and the company. So as a general thesis for all of the investments that we make in VU, the goal is always to go after some of the largest possible market opportunities that exist at any point in human civilization. At the same time, to go after where the magnitude of improvement is the most extreme. And I think what AOA is doing certainly hits both of those categories really well. So AOA, from a high level, is focused on doing early detection of ovarian cancer and potentially other cancers. And founded by a very impressive team. Even I remember learning about the name of the company, AOA, is the name for the three founders, with you, Oriana, as the O in the middle there. And so it's always great to back founders that have had previous successes and have worked together for a number of years. You guys come at this with a very strong background in the overall healthcare industry and working together with prior successes. And what I loved about actually from when we first met, before we even made the decision to invest, one of the things I loved about your approach as a founder was our first conversation where you were really clear about, okay, you had a prior success. Now you're focusing on like, what's the next, big opportunity you want to work on? And you really helped kind of narrow in on something that you thought was a good layup, something that you thought was extremely good to sell into the market, and kind of checked all the right boxes that you thought was a highly successful, an executable opportunity. And so that, for me, that was one of the things that you as a founder are probably one of the strongest founders in our portfolio that I think went into this with a thesis approach of your own about what you were going to do next and why. And you were extremely good, I could tell, as a salesperson for doing this. But as a high level, I remember the things that kind of convinced us early on this opportunity was that ovarian cancer itself is one of those, gets given that silent death often phrase to it, and that oftentimes you're detecting it when it's already too late. And so when you're thinking about a problem to solve, it's a really big problem where you can make a magnitude of difference, being able to unlock the capability to do early detection in kind of the first stage of ovarian cancer and potentially even before that, would make a huge difference for the quality of care that can be given to patients, and being able to do it in a new way that's never been done before at a much higher accuracy level. So thinking of magnitude of improvement, accuracy being 90 to 100% kind of directionally possible compared to the status quo of 60, 70%, and a new methodology approach that is not invasive, can be done more easily and quickly, along with a higher accuracy. So you kind of hit a lot of the core things of one of the biggest challenges of cancer for women, and really having a disruptive approach and the magnitude of improvement of the solution. So it was everything that we liked about a potential investment when we first met. And so I'm going to throw it over to you. I'd love to kind of maybe share a little bit about your background, because you have a pretty interesting background. With you and your founders have worked together for a number of years in prior companies, some of which have had significant successes, and then share a little bit after the background about kind of the initial thought process on the thesis on your own to choose to launch this company.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So Anna, Alex, and I, so AOA, had started working together at a very early stage women's health company over 10 years ago, when the word women's health or femtech was not yet cool or in the media. And we had different roles, different scopes, but it was necessarily early stage employees, always really focused on the execution part. So something that you mentioned, really either clinical trial, go to market, commercialization, distribution. Really, how do you bring these products and innovation forward to impact clinical practice and to actually change the way providers practice and patients are served? And at AmSure, we were developing at the time a test for predicting if a woman's water had broken too early when she was pregnant, or premature rupture of fetal membranes. And at the time, we, again, really early stage, we were learning from a really incredible crew, and that company was acquired, and we were all part of that acquisition and went on to work for a large biotech. That role took me to Germany, where I worked a lot more on global health, still focused in women's health, so infectious diseases, HPV, really thinking, again, how do you adapt technology now to serve different parts of the world, different markets, different healthcare systems, with that same landscape of how does this impact clinical practice? That was always part of my own thesis, but really what I focused on when I was looking for who to work with and companies to work for is, this wasn't, we're not working for technologies that were me too, or that were incrementally better. Like you said, like the magnitude of degree better, that was something that was important. And then after that, there was a company that was spun out of that, Parthogen Diagnostics, that we built out of Boston. And the three of us got back together again with two founders. So there was two founders and us. We had never been founders yet. Very early stage, built another technology in premature birth, and took that through FDA clearance, and that company went on to exit in commercialization. So I'd kind of been in the circle for a while, right? Of like, what does it take to get an innovative technology past the ideation phase and really down the very cumbersome hurdles that exist in healthcare: regulatory, quality, commercialization, evidence generation, reimbursement, et cetera, and then to actually see the products get adopted and impact patients. So we came out of that, the second exit, and this time we said, okay, we've never been founders, I've never been a CEO, but we've been really hands-on operators, so we know a lot of what it takes. Fast forward 3 years, you never know enough. I can guarantee that. Never know enough to actually be doing this, but we thought we knew enough. And we said, we're super passionate about women's health, but we also have expertise and know-how in this space. Like, we've sold to these doctors, we've developed distribution, we've built sales teams. We really know a lot about how to actually get products to patients. And so where else are there big problems in women's health from a diagnostic lens? That's always been our experience, diagnostic. And so we went out to identify where are these big unmet needs? Where are the areas where a monumental change is going to benefit patients, providers, and payers? And we had mapped out endometriosis, preeclampsia, ovarian cancer, just a bunch of different disease areas where the way that it's being diagnosed is either terrible for women, cost the healthcare system far too much money, the outcomes are really poor, and providers are stuck with not having the right tools to help them on the diagnostic journey. And none of us are scientists. So I'll start with that. Alex and I, none of us are scientists. None of us would be in a position, or engineers, or anything where we would go in and develop ourselves. We always knew we had to partner. So I went out to tech transfer offices, academic institutions, publications, patent filings, and I said, where is there the brewing of innovation that could help solve one of my big problems that I really want to help solve? And we tried a lot, and we got a lot of rejection along the way. I remember this one trip where we flew overnight to Portland because we were so close to licensing this really cool technology, only to show up there for the deal not to go through, and like just feeling super defeated, and like, were we ever going to find something? Was anybody going to trust us? We're not scientists. All you may do. And then I got a call in the fall of 2019 from somebody that was advising me. And she said, I just got back from a conference in Montreal. You need to come and meet Professor Zoghbi. And she said, I found what you're looking for, and it's an ovarian cancer. So I got super excited. Fast forward to a few phone calls and a huge leap of faith of deciding to co-apply to a grant together. We essentially ended up building AOA out of licensing an innovation that Professor Zoghbi had started, which was on this premise of a new class of biomarkers. So if you're familiar at all with early detection, we're not the first to enter the space. There are many others. And this idea that, can you diagnose cancer earlier, but also, can you diagnose it from something that's called a liquid biopsy? Can you get it out of the blood without having to surgically intervene and get a biopsy of the tissue first? And there are many companies working on this with many different approaches and many different class of markers. And so maybe you'll have 10 companies working on one class of markers, you know, and different approaches to try to target them. This is a class of markers that nobody was working on from a diagnostic point of view. But the research has shown super valuable in oncology, and there are actually many therapeutic drugs that target these markers, but nobody's worked on them from diagnostic. And he had early data to show their capability to have a signal in early stage ovarian cancer. So we got super excited. And I think, yeah, that was the start of AOA. We were super excited about the partnership with Professor Zoghbi, the early data we had. We kind of jumped in 2 feet forward by applying for some grant funding. This was now early 2020, COVID struck, grant committees closed, right? And so instead of the grant was $1 million, instead of giving one company 1 million, they gave three, or one group 1 million, they give 300,000 to keep the research moving forward. So we ended up with a little bit of money, did some more research. Eventually, a year later, we actually won the full grant. But yeah, so that was the beginning of building AOA. And so we are on this path to have a monumental change in the way ovarian cancer is diagnosed.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, so a few highlights about that from a thesis perspective. What was really attractive about from an investor's perspective is that as investors, we love backing founders that are executors. VCs in general get scared in often backing the scientist, which are typically not very good at capital raising, not so good at execution, and oftentimes it becomes like an R&D playground forever. And so what I liked about what you just shared in that story is that you went into this actually in a way that I wish more founders approached creating companies. And it's something that you often see more serial founders do than initial founders, but you've had experience with having prior successes in companies. And you took this approach was, let me actually go look at all the different things that are out there that I could potentially do as my next big thing. And you took it where you weren't just like, it wasn't you had just like one idea that you wanted to go and execute, which is for many founders, they end up only having like one idea and they make that into their startup. You took this approach where you're doing it actually more like an investor from a perspective is, let's look at lots of different options that are out there. Let's go after some of the biggest problems that you wanted to solve. And you waited until you found the right opportunity that you knew you could execute as long as you had the right science behind you, but you were going to take on the role in your team as the executors. And so a handful of things that kind of are great plays to that is A, you came into this as a serial entrepreneur, which have a higher probability of success in general. And 2, you went at this very much in a formulaic approach of finding the best opportunity to execute that you thought had a really high chance of success by competing lots of different opportunities against each other for that. So again, those are some of the highlights. I remember when we were going over our internal thesis was you went over the same process that we go through in kind of finding opportunities to ultimately decide on what you were going to work on. And share a little bit about that.
Fun. What we thought was one of our biggest weaknesses, and not being scientists is one of our biggest strengths. So I appreciate that.
Exactly, it's true. What would be you really highlighted remember internally during our investment committee, you were a big selling point for why we ultimately decided to make the investment was because we had someone leading the team that was a real executor and not a scientist, and that we're leading this because you also found something that also mitigated a lot of the risks in the future execution that was then going to be happening post the financing of the round in terms of, where do you have the initial confidence that this is going to get through all of the trials successfully? And then 2, the strategy of actually selling this into the market. And you kind of had both of those things figured out. We kind of had the early data that we saw this is going to be paradigm shifting in the early detection capability of ovarian cancer, but also in the significant high accuracy that would change the standard of care for what it is today. So share a little bit about the magnitude of difference between what is the standard care of today, which is a very kind of invasive and not very high accurate approach, versus this new kind of breakthrough approach now that AOA will be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So ovarian cancer is the deadliest of gynecological cancers. And the biggest challenge that exists is that unlike many other types of cancers where you can go in either laparoscopically or with some modality to remove a part of what you suspect may be cancerous tissue, freeze it, send it down to the path lab, biopsy it, and then give the clinician the information to make decisions, that process does not exist in ovarian cancer because of the way that the tumors form in the fallopian tube and the ovary. So today, the only way to get a sample of that tissue to get a diagnosis is to surgically remove the full ovary and the full fallopian tube. So you can imagine that.
2, so that's 1 of 2. So it's not like you get a lot to work with.
1 of 2. That's a permanent. I've had people ask me, do they just reattach it if it's not diseased? And I'm like, unfortunately not. That surgery does not exist yet. That would be grand. And so what ends up happening, because the symptoms of ovarian cancer are not specific, there are things such as abdominal pain, bloating, changes in bowel movement, early satiety, which means you get full really quickly, many of which are persistent over a short period of time. But again, that does not necessarily scream ovarian cancer. It indicates to the woman something's wrong and I should go see a doctor. But once they show up at the doctor, those symptoms can be associated with irritable bowel syndrome, endometriosis, fibroids, cystadenomas, ovarian cancer, pregnancy, UTI. All of those, with the exception of pregnancy and UTI, don't actually have a diagnostic test. So it's a process of elimination for all of those conditions, which involves visiting many different specialties across the healthcare system, which involves many different procedures, only to end up in a place where the physician is saying, okay, I think I've eliminated everything else. This could be ovarian cancer. How confident I am that this is not, do I send this woman to surgery? Who do I send her to surgery to? Because if I suspect it's ovarian cancer, that surgery has to be performed by an oncologist. But do I really have to refer her to oncology if it could be just a simple mass? And on average in the United States, that process for a woman takes 9 months. They see over 4 different specialties and have multiple procedures and prescriptions. Over 30% of women were prescribed antidepressants prior to a diagnosis of ovarian cancer.
Wow. And I think the point is that the fact that you have the symptoms that show for it are something that could be so many other things and not necessarily ovarian cancer. And some of them are so light that it's just like, oh, it might not be anything, don't worry about it. And the fact that that can be that answer all the way until you realize, oh, I have stage 4 ovarian cancer and you're going to be dying soon. And so huge challenge for the market. And so if you think of the status quo right now is, even if you were to go forward in getting that procedure, share a little bit about the difference in terms of today, what is the status quo in terms of if you do the test, oftentimes what is that probability of accuracy? Because one of the things that also, when you think about how terrible the status quo is even if you do some of the tests that are out there, you're still going to have a relatively low indication. 60, 70% means that, okay, if we do some basic tests and it says it's 60 to 70% accurate, it still means like, I think we should still then take out one of the fallopian tubes and then absolutely confirm that it is. And at that point, that's really unfortunate. You have to go all the way that way. So if there was, then getting into AOA's solution, a way of doing it non-invasively and getting practically 100%, 92 to almost 100% accuracy becomes a huge difference in the status of care. So share a little bit about the magnitude of difference in that.
Yeah. And I think to that point about the magnitude of difference, it's not, and I don't want to use the word just, it's not only about the surgery, because at the end of the day, many women, I think, would agree if the only option to saving my life is potentially removing this organ, then I can understand that. The sad reality is, because of how long it takes to get to diagnosis in the United States, being 9 months, and early stage tumor volumes double every 4 months, by the time those women are finally getting diagnosed, 80% are already at stage 3 and 4. Yeah. Even though 9 months earlier, when they first showed up to a doctor, they could have been at stage 1 and 2. And the 5-year survival rate at stage 3 and 4 disease is less than 30%. The majority of these women will not live to 5 years. Yeah. Whereas those that are lucky enough to get diagnosed at stage 1 and 2 have a 5-year survival rate of over 90%.
That's incredible.
Right? So we're losing women not only because of how fast spreading this disease is, but how slow we are at catching it. And to your point about the tools and the mechanisms that exist today, you're absolutely right. They're at best 50 to 70% accurate, which means at best the physician is like 50 to 70% chance she has ovarian cancer. Do I not send her? Do I send her? Do I not send her? Woman goes to surgery. Okay, she had it. It's too late. She didn't have it. She lost her organs. And what we're trying to do is really, really change that so that we can stage shift disease, right? When those women are showing up, they're going to the doctor, right? 87% of women with these symptoms and that eventually had ovarian cancer sought medical care, that primarily at their OBGYN or their primary care physician. Because again, when you hear these symptoms, I'm not thinking oncologist. I'm thinking something's wrong in my abdominal or gynecological area. From there, doctors are already doing tests. They're doing an ultrasound. They're running blood work. They're checking family history. They're already checking for things. The challenge is they don't have the right tools to check for ovarian cancer. And that's where AOA comes in. What if at that appointment, when that woman is showing up with symptoms, when she's already getting her blood drawn, she's already getting imaging done, there was a blood test that with high sensitivity, meaning catching the disease, could find early stage and late stage of ovarian cancer. With an over 90% sensitivity, say to the doctor in that first appointment, it's very likely that this woman has ovarian cancer. Don't send her to gastro. Don't send her to urology. Don't do more things. Send her to oncology because she needs care today. And they can
Takes the
that
whole
step forward.
that whole guesswork is taken out of it, because such a high probability that if it's that accurate, you pretty much have it at that point. That is again incredible to be able to also do it. Also, not only the accuracy, but at the early stages. So I think that was the other interesting thing, is that the fact that this can be done in kind of the first stage, and potentially even before the first stage, the fact that it can be detected so early was also the critical thing, not just the accuracy.
That's what excited us the most. I mean, so when Professor Zoghbi really started with his data, he had some really interesting signal readouts, both in tissue and in blood, in early stage ovarian cancer. And then when, so we have now a published peer review publication, which with this original method where we were able to really show the ability to detect the signals in early stage. Now it's on us to actually translate that into commercial product. And I don't want to underplay how challenging and difficult that is, to take an academic invention and idea into a version of technology that can actually be not only commercialized, that can be scaled, reproduced, and approved by regulatory bodies, which is the phase that AOA is in right now. And our goal in this phase is to develop a version of this innovation that can actually go to clinic while maintaining that accuracy to be able to predict early stage disease as well.
Yep. No. And then I think, and the other thing I guess to layer onto this is part of the thesis of why it really does become a great new opportunity for women and for the industry, is also being able to do it at a low price point and such a simple approach with kind of a simple blood test, that this is something that really regulatory policy will probably want to be updated going forward, is that women, effectively after the age of like 40, 50 years old, our push is that this would be done on like an annual basis, get an annual check. Right now, the status quo is that unless you say you have a symptom, then insurance wouldn't cover it. And because the symptom can pretty much be almost any, like such a huge range, which could actually mean that you might have ovarian cancer. It's one of those things that, like, the way that the future of women's healthcare looks like it needs to evolve is if you can provide solutions that are simple and at a low cost, that can be part of mainstream, mass market annual checkup that just happens. That is kind of the real big breakthrough, I think, about the industry. And so the question will be then, at what point can you say, okay, every woman over the certain age just basically gets this done, and or the doctor themselves just recommends that you get this done once a year, rather than waiting for you to have, I'm just feeling bloated to like for this month. You never know, you could come up with some symptom that actually triggers the need to then say, okay, just to be safe, you're past a certain age where it starts becoming a potential thing we should screen for. Now this becomes something that a large portion of women over a certain age should start getting this done, at least a check once a year.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The reality is, the first part is technology and accuracy, right? So we need to make sure that we develop a technology that is accurate for all the intended use populations. As an example, a symptomatic test, one in which implies that because a woman is feeling symptoms, she's sick, it requires a high sensitivity threshold. When you go to an asymptomatic population, which is a screening population, you required a high specificity threshold. So that, the first step is ensuring that our technology is developed in a way that matches the different intended use populations and that observes the accuracy that is needed for that patient group. But after that, you have regulatory and reimbursement, which you alluded to, right? You need your regulatory bodies to clear the use of your technology in those populations. And those clinical trials, those thresholds are very, very different. And then payer. I mean, today, there is a lot of talk around asymptomatic screening. We've seen the worlds of Grail and Freenome and Ameni, and there hasn't been the reimbursement to keep up with the innovation that's there. And so there's a lot of work to be done beyond just AOA. I think what we're excited about is being a part of this community. This is why I think one of our missions is to talk as loud as we can about the importance, because women's health is already kind of neglected in this world, but also just the general thought of early screening and early detection is very much private pay today, which serves only a specific portion of the population. And that's really unfortunate, because we know the outcomes are actually worse in the portion of the population that can't afford to pay for their annual sort of screening or CT scan or whatever, maybe MRI is what I was looking for. So I think
it's also
a lot of work to be done there beyond. We can focus all day long on technology, but if we as a company and the other companies in this space are not vocal and sort of the advocates of the other areas is how does regulatory keep up with the changes in the ecosystem? How does reimbursement and how do guidelines keep up? I think we're part of an ecosystem here.
You think of the platform that AOA is building too, really interesting kind of novel new technology that's able to screen for cancers using blood. And so it also is something where, as a play, the platform is able to do screening going forward beyond just ovarian cancer. So one of the interesting breakthroughs of what you guys have developed with the science background there is that it has the capability of doing more than just ovarian cancer. And so you kind of have a platform that you have a lot of different other things that could also be screened going forward using a blood sample. So you share a little bit more about the spectrum of effectively what could be tested with this kind of new breakthrough approach.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, it was also what really excited us about the opportunity is that glycosides, they're a family of markers. And in this family of markers, what we know from the literature is that there's at least 12 different markers that are cancer-related markers, so tumor-related markers. And the platform that we're building, it really gives us the ability to essentially map the different targets to disease signatures, to really understand, okay, these targets are most prevalent in ovarian cancer, and using data science and AI, we are essentially able to develop a predictive algorithm for ovarian cancer. But what other targets and their combinations and their expressions allow us to really seek other cancers? And as a seed stage company, which was right before we raised this round, and even today, I would say we're always very product focused. I think that ties back into our nature of executing is we don't really, I've heard this said a lot, and I would say we're one of the believers of this. You don't really have a platform until you have your first working product, because otherwise, as you said, you kind of end up in that R&D circle, right? And so we're incredibly focused on getting to our first assay, our first indication, because when you're innovating a new class of markers, you don't really prove the thesis until you have something that's actually working. And for us, working means a product that can serve patients, right? Yep. So that's the focus. Now that we've raised this new round of capital, what we've also done is allocated a small portion of the budget while continuing to search for non-dilutive funding to allow us to do more exploratory work and really think about where do we go. So we've done some really incredible market mapping and really understanding where do glycolipids present themselves, but also where are there big, more unmet needs. That's my nature, is like, where is there a problem? I'm not here to develop another test that like everybody else already does and just try to find a way to do it cheaper. Where are there big unmet needs? Things in women's health include things like leiomyosarcoma. It's a type of cancer that develops, and there are hundreds of thousands of women a year that develop fibroids and that it could develop into leiomyosarcoma. And again, there's no way to diagnose that. Triple negative breast cancer, really, really challenging from a companion diagnostic point of view. Melanoma, no good way to catch a reoccurrence of melanoma, right? And so really thinking about where are there other conditions where there are challenges in the diagnostic workflow, where are glycolipids shown to really be a valuable target, and how can we combine that in the effort of our platform to unlock new product potentials?
Yeah, I think that it's a nice kind of, I always call those parts of like the cherry on top. They have the ovarian cancer that is on its own a company that can be worth a significant amount, but then having the capability of doing a handful of other cancer targets is great when it comes to IPO, valuations, things like that. Is really good enhancements. And also the round that you raised, in times right now, obviously raising venture funding is probably one of the hardest capital raising environments that have happened in like the last decade or more. The other thing that you've done extraordinarily well, and a lot of credit to your own prior success and backgrounds, is the Series A that you raised is probably going to be one of the larger Series A's for companies right now that are being raised. And it goes to the fact that you had so much, I think, lined up for how you're going to execute with this capital. And then going forward, what beyond just the risk mitigation and getting through the trials coming up, but also then the commercialization side of this. Because I think a lot of times when our healthcare team evaluates, pharma, biotech, and that overall category, some of them are purely, a lot of R&D, and then you're kind of hoping for, going public or getting acquired before any commercialization happens. AOA is in a great position because you've de-risked it to a degree where you're going to go through the trials. You have the option of, at that point, certainly growing into a large company prior to even commercialization. But there's also the commercialization path that is very executable, even with just an additional financing after the round you just did. So share a little bit about the the part that you've kind of pre-mapped a lot of the and this kind of goes to your own internal thesis that you did to decide to do this company, the strategy that then gets played out. You kind of prove that this works, and the pathway then into selling this into the market.
Yeah. So I mean, that's my nature. I was a salesperson at first. When I first began my career in women's health, it was in sales. And then from there, it was in either business development or go to market, distribution, et cetera. So I don't know. I think as individuals, you end to fall back to what you're most comfortable in. And so when I first started to develop AOA and the thought about ovarian cancer, my mind was always like, well, how am I going to sell it? Like if it was me that was on the field, and how would I sell it? And is there an opportunity? Because I've done every version of objection handling that exists. So I think I kind of came up with what were all the objections and could I sell, to them. And for us, where we've been really most successful is having a very targeted sales team in our key markets. So in the United States, having a direct sales force. In Europe, in certain countries, sometimes we'll have a direct force, but otherwise having very key specific distributors. What does that mean? It means distributors that focus in women's health, that already sell to OBGYNs, and that have a precedent in introducing novel diagnostics. I have been part of sales teams and organizations and acquisitions where a product was acquired really before it was launched, and it becomes part of a catalog sale. And at that point, it's really, really hard to drive adoption, right? And the way you incentivize your salespeople and the way you incentivize your distributors is really challenging, because introducing a novel technology is not the same as growing a market. It is an entirely different sale, right? You have your hunters and you have your farmers. And when you're introducing something novel in healthcare, where you are met instinctively by physicians with skepticism, because it's all based on clinical data, then you really, really need to have a team that's focused on it. But the same, usually, I don't want to knock on any large corporations, but that's usually why innovation happens at small companies, because it's focus, 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 right? That's the exact same philosophy at which we think about building our sales team. So when we think about launching our first test in the ovarian cancer market, it's with a direct sales team in the United States that's calling on OBGYN, that's also calling on labs, because that's essentially where the assay will be run, that's working with your key opinion leaders, that's essentially doing your guidelines, your clinical publications, your abstracts, your conferences, all the way that you're publishing, essentially the influencers of our space. And in parallel to that, working with really strategic women's health distributors, for which we have a network for, because we've sold in preterm birth, we've sold in rupture of fetal membranes, we've sold in HPV and cervical cancer. So, we've sold in a lot of these different areas. And so what we believe will be most successful for AOA is when we get our clearance and our ability to launch it in the market, we will begin commercializing it. And that's not to say that we don't engage in some partnership or some opportunity along the way, but the way I've structured, or the way we've been part of deals that were structured, is when essentially the technologies got sold, the sales teams got sold with them. And we integrated those sales teams in a way that said, don't give my product a catalog sale at your existing sales team just yet. Take my team, give it 2 years to really get the ground running, and then we can think about integrating, because anything sooner than that, I've seen products get shelved, I've seen people lose focus. Like, you spend so much time, money, blood, sweat, tears. Like I said, when I started this, we thought we knew what we were doing. I mean, I think we do, but also we didn't know a shit ton. And now we know a lot. And now we're like, in literally the blood, sweat, and tears of building this technology, that I'm not going to be satisfied if it sits on a shelf.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Exactly right. I think what you have, which a lot of other founders have, is you have the experience in already selling into these channels successfully, and so you already have kind of a good go-to plan for how to do it again. It's a new product service, but same type of channel strategy that you've been successful doing in the past, and that's a big difference in the ability to do it, faster, to a bigger scale. All of that is really does become a lot easier to do. It's like you take someone who's scaled a company to 150 person team before, doing it a second time is a lot easier than the first time. If you could actually,
I
if
will
you've never
say I have
scaled
not scaled to 150 ever before, but it's the same. Just
yeah, but it's like riding a bike. Like, you have to have done it 1 or 2 times to scale. And the next time you're doing it, it's a lot easier. So that's the one big advantage that experience has, that you have in terms of scaling up on a sales strategy, which is great. I guess going forward, from a future perspective, how do you see right now, the future of cancer diagnostics evolving, just as an overall industry? Because AOA is playing a very critical role in kind of providing a new infrastructure for the industry to do testing across potentially a pretty wide range of cancers. But I guess, how do you see that developing outside of the fact that obviously there's a good spectrum of cancer therapies themselves, that there's a whole nother category to invest in general, but specifically for AOA around the world of cancer diagnosis, how do you think that's going to kind of evolve, and kind of where AOA's role is going to be along that path?
Yeah, I think honestly, I'm really, really excited. I think the world of early detection we're just at the tip of the iceberg of what can be done. And if you think about where we were even 10 to 15 years ago, the accessibility and the cost of things such as next generation sequencing, which we were just beginning to do, we've already seen a lot of the cost of that go down, and a lot of the competition increase, which is a good thing, and a lot of innovation increase. And where I hope we're going is an area of really democratizing early access to testing. Again, so it's not just the elite few that can pay for their whole body MRI or get an annual Braille test because they can afford it, but really thinking about, as all the companies sort of in this world, is how are we thinking about driving policy? How are we thinking about driving this ecosystem forward? So the innovation, the tools, the breakthroughs that we're doing don't serve only a certain segment of the population that can afford to pay for it themselves, but how do we introduce this as medical benefits that many others who today succumb to really worse outcomes because they don't have the same access. So I'm excited for the world sort of cancer diagnostics. I'm excited to see many big players. Sometimes I'll hear, not often, but sometimes I'll hear, there's a lot going on in liquid biopsy. How are you going to stand out? And I said, that's the thing I'm least concerned about. There's a lot going on in liquid biopsy, which is a good thing, because we're light years behind and we need this much momentum to move the whole industry forward. And how am I going to stand out doesn't come down to the world liquid biopsy. It mostly comes down to my team and my execution. And I think that's what we have, that's what we're in control over, right? Like, what are we going to do with this exciting innovation? Because I think the statistic is 91% of medical innovation stays in academia.
Sure.
Can you imagine if there were people that could execute on all of that? We'd solve all the health problems.
Correct. Yeah, that's for, I know as VCs, one of our biggest challenges has always been we source opportunities from a lot of different places, and sourcing from academia and universities has been one of those places where, yeah, you can certainly source deals, but finding people that can actually execute on those opportunities, that's tough.
It's so hard. It's so hard. It's really hard. And so it's not the class of marker that's going to make AOA successful. It's not even a test in ovarian cancer. It's the team that's going to execute on it.
Yep. 100% right. Yeah. So really excited about what you guys are working on. In terms of the last question on feedback that you would give to other founders, and even if you think back to your earlier self, kind of like wisdom that you would have given your younger self on going down this journey now in a serial entrepreneur, you're definitely a lot more advanced than where you started. Any kind of good guiding wisdom that you would give to your younger self and or other founders that are thinking about what should be the next company that they create or the first company they create? Any kind of good mental frameworks of wisdom that you'd share?
The first that comes to mind is something that applies to the stage that I'm in right now, which is scaling. So I'll come back to that. To your question about sort of inception, I think find something that you are willing to not sleep or eat over. And I'm not saying that you don't have to sleep or eat, because I certainly did, right? But that's the level of excitement that you have, because there will come a time where you won't sleep or eat for days because you're just like grinding through it, and it will bother you a lot less, and you will have the resilience to overcome it if from the inception you felt that way.
Yeah, something you could be a lot more obsessed with.
Something you can be really obsessed with, like not something which is, I don't know how to describe it. It's like, it's more than passion. It's like indignation, right?
Yeah.
Of like, that's like, I need to, want to, won't do anything else, kind of, because it gets really hard, and it can be, especially when you're fundraising.
No, I'm with you on that.
And when you're in the science world and you're going through data readouts and they're not what you want them to be, and you realize that you still have months of work to do, and it's just like, it gets really hard. And so if you don't have that innate indignation, passion, whatever you want to call it, it's going to make the journey a lot harder.
And then you brought up the other point. So then at the point that you're at now, on the scaling side, which is actually a good follow-up question that I should certainly ask founders, is now that you're at your stage now, and you've been at these kind of stages in the past with prior companies, what advice would you give for when you're starting to focus on the scaling side, now that you've already kind of identified the company, have the early kind of core product? ready to go.
Do not underestimate the power of people and hiring. And so many people told me that, and I didn't believe them because I have done a phenomenal job hiring salespeople, and I know what to look for, and I know how to assess them, and I know how to interview them. This stage of the company were much earlier, and this was a really true first for me to try to build a team of across the gambit, operational, clinical, scientific leaders, etc. And previously, even if I had been head of North America, I wasn't at the top of the chain. This is my first time there, and so many people told me, don't underestimate hiring. Think about hiring the people you bring in. And I was like, it can't be that hard. It's so hard because it's not just one hire. It's how that hire integrates with the rest of your team. And then it's how does your team of 6 evolve into a team of 12, into a team of 20? And how do those 6 grow into that? How do your roles change? How does the dynamic of the company change? Like I spend, I don't want to give a percentage, but an enormous high amount of time right now working on people.
Yeah.
And finally understanding the complexity, because we were working on a slide today and it was like our corporate goals, etc. And somebody asked me the question, is hiring and scale really the first one? Because like, this seems like if we don't hit this, etc. And I was like, nothing happens at the company without people. Goal 2, 3, 4, 5, nothing happens. We won't get a product. We won't do a clinical study. We won't get regulatory. Nothing happens without people. And I was the first to underestimate that.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on it. I know one of the things that I've learned, I've done now, I guess, about 150 plus investments over the last 15, 16 years. And one of the things that I've learned on scaling is if you take companies that have scaled, let's say to like, 10 to 50 people, and then they go from 50 to 100 people, is when you start modeling it out, mathematically scaling something is also a lot easier to do it than scaling humans. And so we had one of our portfolio companies from, I don't know, about 7 years ago. They did a large financing to grow their team from 150 to 300 people. And like they've already got to 150, so like how hard it would be to double it again. And they made the mistake where they didn't hire the people to hire the people. And so 12 months went by and they didn't really grow the size of the team. Good thing is they still had a lot of money in the bank, but they didn't hire the people to hire the people.
100%. That was the first question I asked, and I was posting in some of like founder Slack channels. I was like, we're estimating to be about 20 people next year. What do I need HR? Like I don't know the answer to that question. Like so.
Yeah, it is interesting of when you start working in the world of reality than the world of just mathematical scaling. But you only know it if you've actually done it. I think that's a big deal. And there's a lot of humbleness, I think, when you talk to people that have actually done it. They truly do internalize those type of statements that you're bringing up about, focus on the people, because nothing's going to get done without them. There's a lot of talkers out there and few people that actually do. And that's another big thing, is you need the people that are doing. So again, with a highlight that one of the big reasons we ended up backing the company was you and your team at the top, and knowing that you had executors in place. And I'd always back an executor over a scientist any day. And so really excited for what you're doing with AOA. So I'm excited to see the progress to come. You now have a good war chest to kind of go out now to execute. I think over the next 1 to 2 years. And so excited to seeing this come to market. It's something that I think the population for women will certainly be improved significantly for what they can have as a standard of care, and something that has a lot more pervasive, broader market opportunities across screening for early detection of cancers overall. That'll be great for, again, the future of human civilization. So very big, exciting mission that you guys are on. And I think you have the right setup to also execute on it. So
thank you. I appreciate that. And we appreciate you guys investing in it.
Agreed. Cool. Thanks, Oriana.